Alright guys, let's go into how this is going to work with Desmos. So on Desmos, you're going to see a problem that looks like this. Create a table for the following function. I obviously cannot type. English is not my thing, you guys know this. So let's look at this function right here. We have 4 sine 3 of x. So I'm going to write that in our little sketch pad over here. Y equals 4 sine of 3x. Alright, we want to create a table for this. So, we're not going to be given the graph just yet. That'll be in the next problem, but let's create a table using this. So we know our midline is this c value here. So notice we don't have a c value. So if there's no c value, your midline is going to be y equals c, or in this case, y equals 0. All right, that's your midline. Then you want to determine your amplitude. Your amplitude, remember, is the value of a. I don't know why I keep doing so many things, which is a is equal to, or the absolute value of a is equal to 4. The absolute value of 4, which is just 4. And then you need to determine the period. So the period is going to be 2 pi over b, and in this case, your b is 3, so 2 pi over 3. All right, how this is going to work with your table is a little different. So you'll need to determine what your midline is. If your midline is 0, you know that your 5-point pattern for any sine function is going to be your midline, your max, midline, your minimum, back to your midline. All right, so that means that our x values here is we're going to start at our midline. We always start at 0. So we're going to start at 0. And then we're going to use the period to determine the next 4 points after this. So we know it's going to get to 2 pi over 3. So this, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots, and that 5th spot is going to be 2 pi over 3. So on this calculator, you can do 2 pi over 3, 2 pi divided by 3. And once you hit enter, notice that it gives you, that decimal, so 2.094. What you're going to do is split that decimal up into 4 sections. So if we split that up into 4 sections, so take this is equal to 2.094. All right, take the period and divide it by 4, and that will give you your other 3 values over here. So the period divided by 4, so 2.094 divided by 4 is going to be 2.094 divided by 4. 0.5235, let's say 0.52. Let's just leave it like that. So that means that we want this one to be 0.52. And then you're going to add that to each number after that. So 0.52, let's do 0.0 or 0.52 plus or times 2. That's going to be this number, which is 1.04. And then this last one, 0.52 times 3. Since this is a calculator, it'll do it for you. So there's your decimals. So you have 0, 0.52, 1.04, 1.56, and 2.094 as your 5 points on your graph. Now to determine those y values. So instead of taking our graph and writing out our max and our min and all those things, we know that given your amplitude here, and your midline being 0, we need to go 4 above and 4 below 0. So following our 5-point pattern, the first point we're going to be at our midline. Our midline is going to be 0. The next point we go to our max. So if we're starting at 0 and we go to our max is going to be 4 above our midline, which is just 4. Then we go back to our midline, which is 0. Now we go down to our minimum. If we're going below 0 by 4 points, that's going to give us -4. And then we go back up to our midline. Once you hit enter, it enters in a couple more spaces for you, but you don't need all those spaces. Those are the only ones that I need you guys to plot and come up with. You don't need to use the sketch pad on your actual thing, but it's there on Desmos if you guys want it. Then you'll hit next. In this screen, it's going to complete the problems on the left side of the graph, enter in the table of values you created on the previous screen, then enter in the equation of the graph. So enter in what you guys came up with for your y values. Would we say 0, 0.52, 1.04, and then you have 1.56, and then what was the last one? 2.094. You guys can switch back and forth on your guys' computer. And then for your y values, we were at 0 to our max, which was 4. Back down to 0 to your minimum, which was -4. Back to 0. That didn't work out. 0, 4, 0, -4. Back to 0. Why does our graph? Oh no, it did. Our graph works out. So it's going to plot those points for you. And what you guys are going to do is now enter in the equation from the page before. If you scroll back, that was y equals 4 sine. Can we copy and paste? No, it doesn't let you copy and paste. So 4 sine 3x. So enter this in. There's a... Okay, calm down, iPad. It comes up with the keyboard for equations. So you can just type that in from the previous page. Y equals 4. And then if you go to functions, there's going to be sine for you, and then 3x, and then close your parentheses. All right, so notice that your red dots went away because our graph covered up your red dots. So these are all the points that you guys should have had if you guys split it up into your 4 things correctly. And then the last thing says if your points don't match up with the graph, determine where you went wrong. Well, our points matched up, so we are good to go. All right, you can leave these x values as pi over 2, pi over 3, just like we did before. If you guys wanted, your table on here will convert them automatically to a decimal. So if you don't know how to convert it to a decimal, this one will do it for you already. All right, and then you completed this. So notice that your red dots were on your graph and you did that correctly. That's 1 full rotation. So let's go to a similar problem. You're gonna have to answer this question. All right, now similar problem. What if your midline is 1? This just changes things a little bit, not by much. So if we have y is equal to -3 sine of, let's say, pi over 2x plus 1, your first thing is to determine your midline. Your midline is going to be this c value, so y equals 1. Your amplitude, in this case, is the absolute value of -3, which is just 3. And then the period, 2 pi divided by b, which is pi over 2, which is 2 pi times 2 over pi. Pi's cancel out and you end up with 4. So your period is 4. And then you know your pattern. So in this case, a is less than 0. So you have to start at your midline and then your minimum, not your max. So midline, midline again, back to your max, back to the midline for 1 complete cycle. So we need to use this to help us determine our points on our graph. So let's start with our x values. What values are we going to plug into here? Well, we know our first one is always 0. And then we have to, our last one, 5th point will be the period. And now everything in between, well, we want to figure out 4 divided by 4. Well, we know we're going to take our period and divide it by 4. So 4 divided by 4, which is just 1. So each of these after this increase by 1, 2, and 3. Now your y values. We said over here we're starting at our midpoint. So at our midpoint, or our midline, here is your midline. So that's what is going to go over here. That is going to be your midline. And then you go to your minimum. Well, you know that your amplitude is 3. So to find the minimum, let's see, to find the minimum, you are going to take your midline and subtract your amplitude, which is 3, or 1 minus 3. 1 minus 3 gives you -2. So this point, your minimum would be -2. And then your next one is back to your midline, And then your maximum, you're going to take your midline and you're going to add 3 to it. So 1 plus 3 is 4. And then we go back down to our midline. All right, so this is a lot of information in our scratch pad over here. But if you guys need to rewind, you guys can to see how we got some of these things. So our period, let's erase this so you guys can see how we got our our minimum will be 1 minus 3, which is -2, and then our max will be the midline plus our amplitude, which is 4. Right, so that's how we determine our minimum and our maximum for this pattern. So now let's go to graphing this. All right, our x values, we did 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Your y values, well, we started at our midline, which was 1, to our minimum, -2, midline, which is 1, maximum is 4, back down to your midline, which is 1. So your red dots will pop up. All right, once your red dots pop up, go down to now enter in the equation below. So enter in the equation from the previous page. If we go back, it's -3 sine pi over 2x plus 1. So remember y equals, and then to get -3, to get that sign, you're going to hit function or just type it in on your keyboard. Sine, and then pi over 3, here's pi. To get a fraction, divide. So pi over 2. Move your arrow key to the right one to hit x. Close your parentheses, plus 1. All right, and double check that your line goes through those red points to see if they match up.